The gold band caught the morning light streaming through the threadbare curtains, and for one heartbreaking moment, Delilah Grant wondered if she could actually go through with it. Her stomach growled, answering the question for her as she wrapped the ring in a handkerchief and slipped it into her coat pocket, her hands trembling as she stepped out into the bitter Colorado morning of March 1884. The streets of Rico were already bustling despite the early hour, miners heading toward the silver claims that dotted the surrounding mountains, their boots crunching against patches of snow that refused to surrender to spring. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore how loose her dress had become in the past month, how the fabric hung where it once fit snugly against her frame. The pawnshop sat wedged between the saloon and the dry goods store, its windows foggy with condensation. Delilah had walked past it 100 times, never imagining she would actually cross its threshold. But then, she had never imagined a lot of things. She had never imagined her father would die in a mining accident 6 weeks ago, leaving her alone in this mountain town with nothing but debts and a rapidly emptying pantry. She had never imagined the mine owners would refuse to pay his final wages, claiming he had damaged equipment in the cave and that killed him. She had never imagined how quickly neighbors who had seemed friendly would turn away when she knocked on their doors, looking for work. The bell above the pawnshop door jangled as she entered, and the proprietor, a thin man with spectacles that magnified his watery eyes, looked up from his ledger. He did not greet her, just waited with the patient expression of someone who had seen desperation walk through his door countless times before. "I need to sell this," Delilah said, her voice steadier than she felt. She unwrapped the ring and placed it on the counter. It had belonged to her mother, passed down from her grandmother before that. The band was thin, worn smooth by generations of wear, but the small ruby set in its center still caught the light. The pawnbroker picked it up, examined it with a jeweler's loupe and set it down. $2. $2, Delilah's voice cracked. "But it is real gold. That ruby is very small and flawed," the man interrupted. $2 is my offer. Take it or leave it." She thought of the empty shelves at home, thought of the gnawing hunger that had become her constant companion, thought of Mrs. Henderson at the general store, who had stopped extending credit last week. $2 would buy a sack of flour, maybe some beans. It would keep her alive for another week or two while she figured something out. "I will take it," she whispered. The pawnbroker counted out 2 silver dollars and made a notation in his ledger. Delilah stared at the ring one last time, committing it to memory, then turned and walked out before the tears could fall. Mrs. Henderson looked surprised to see her when she entered the general store. The older woman had been kind once, had even brought over a casserole after Delilah's father died, but kindness did not pay bills, and Delilah knew she had worn out her welcome. "I have money today," Delilah said quietly, placing the $2 on the counter. "I need a sack of flour, please." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "Just flour, dear." "With $2 you could just flour," Delilah repeated. She had done the calculations. Flour would last longest. She could make hardtack biscuits without butter or eggs. She could stretch it further than anything else. Mrs. Henderson hefted a 20-pound sack onto the counter and counted out the change, mostly pennies. Delilah gathered the heavy sack in her arms and trudged back toward the small cabin at the edge of town that had been her home for the past 3 years, since she and her father had come to Rico, chasing the promise of silver strikes and steady work. She did not notice the cowboy watching from across the street. Bennett Brooks had ridden into Rico 2 days earlier, his saddlebags heavy with the wages from 6 months of trail work. He was 24, tall and weathered from long days under the sun, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of the summer sky. He had grown up on a ranch in eastern Colorado, learned to ride before he could walk, and had spent the last 5 years drifting from one cattle drive to the next, saving his money with a vague notion of starting his own spread someday. He had been standing outside the land office when he saw her come out of the pawn shop, and something about the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself so carefully upright despite obvious exhaustion, had caught his attention. He watched her go into the general store and emerge with the flour sack, struggling under its weight, and he felt an inexplicable urge to help. But Rico was not his town, and she was not his concern, so he tipped his hat lower and continued on his way to the saloon, where he had arranged to meet a rancher named Callahan who supposedly had work available. Callahan was already at a corner table, nursing a whiskey. He was in his 50s, with a face like tanned leather and the calculating eyes of a man who had spent decades turning profit in an unforgiving landscape. Bennett sat down and ordered coffee. "You are the wrangler Hutchins recommended?" Callahan asked without preamble. "I am. Bennett Brooks. Worked the Goodnight-loving trail, the Western Trail, spent a season at the XIT ranch in the Panhandle." Callahan nodded, apparently satisfied. "I need someone who can handle himself with horses and men both. I have got a herd that needs moving from my winter range up near Silverton down to the railhead in Durango next month. 3 weeks' work, maybe $50 plus meals." It was good money for good work. Bennett should have agreed immediately. Instead, he found himself asking, "You know a young woman in town? Dark hair about this tall." He held his hand at shoulder height. "Looks like she has not had a decent meal in weeks." Callahan's expression darkened. "That would be Delilah Grant. Her father was Thomas Grant, died in the Humboldt mine collapse last month. Damn shame that. Tom was a good man, one of the best drillers in the territory. She is alone, far as I know. No other family. Tom came here from Kansas, I think, after his wife died. Brought the girl with him." Callahan took a sip of his whiskey. There was talk about the mine owners refusing to pay his final wages. Some nonsense about him being responsible for the collapse. Load of horse apples, if you ask me. That mine has been a death trap for years, but the owners do not want to spend money on proper timbering. Bennett felt anger stir in his chest. He knew the type. Men who counted profits while other men died in the dark, who hid behind lawyers and paperwork while families starved. "Nobody helping her," Callahan shrugged. "Rico is not a rich town. Most folks got their own troubles. The church ladies brought her some food the first week, but that charity only goes so far. I heard she has been trying to find work, but what is there for a young woman alone? The respectable jobs are taken, and the other kind." He left the sentence unfinished. Bennett stared into his coffee cup, thinking of the way she had clutched that flour sack like it was salvation itself. $50 was good money. He could afford to part with some of it. "I will take the job," he said, "but I need to take care of something first." He left Callahan at the table and walked to the general store. Mrs. Henderson was restocking shelves when he entered, and she turned with the practiced smile of a shopkeeper. "Can I help you, sir?" "The young woman who was just in here. Delilah Grant. She bought flour." Mrs. Henderson's expression became guarded. "Yes, and she paid for it fair and square, if that is your concern." "No concern. I want to buy some things and have them delivered to her place. Anonymously." The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose. "Anonymously. That is right. She does not need to know who sent them. Just tell her it is from a friend or make up whatever story you like. Can you do that?" Mrs. Henderson studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I suppose I can." "What did you want to send?" Bennett looked around the store, trying to think what someone living alone would need. Beans, rice, salt pork, coffee, sugar, lard, cornmeal, eggs if they will keep, potatoes, dried apples, whatever else you think a person needs to get by for a month or so. That is going to be quite a bill, Mr. Brooks, Bennett Brooks, and I can pay. He pulled out a leather pouch and counted bills onto the counter. Make it enough to fill her pantry proper, and add in some of those peppermint sticks in the jar there. Mrs. Henderson's face softened into a genuine smile. She has not had a sweet thing in weeks, I would wager. This is very kind of you, Mr. Brooks. He felt embarrassed suddenly, as if he had revealed too much. Just seems wrong letting someone go hungry when there is food to be had. When can you deliver it? My husband can take the wagon over this afternoon. She lives in the little cabin past the church, up toward the tree line. You are sure you want this to be anonymous? Bennett nodded. He could not explain why even to himself. Maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to be proud, to struggle, to need help, but be too stubborn to ask for it. If she knew the food came from a stranger, she might refuse it out of pride. But if she thought it was from some unnamed benefactor, some mystery friend, maybe she would accept it. Yes, madam. Do not tell her who it is from. He paid the bill, which came to nearly $30 once Mrs. Henderson had tallied everything up, and left the store feeling lighter despite the significant dent in his savings. He had enough left for a room at the boarding house and meals for a few weeks, until Callahan's job started. That was all he needed. Delilah was kneading dough on the rough wooden table when she heard the wagon pull up outside. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window, peering out cautiously. Mr. Henderson, the storekeeper's husband, was climbing down from the seat, and the wagon bed was full of crates and sacks. She opened the door, confused. Mr. Henderson, I think you have made a mistake. I did not order anything. The older man touched his hat brim. No mistake, Miss Grant. These are for you. But I cannot afford. I just bought flour this morning. That is all I could, already paid for, Mr. Henderson interrupted gently. Someone wanted you to have these things. Did not give a name, just said to tell you they are from a friend. Delilah stared at him, comprehension slowly dawning. A friend? Who? Do not know, miss. Fellow came into the store right after you left, paid cash, and said to bring these out to you. Would not say who he was. Said you did not need to know. A fellow, what did he look like? Mr. Henderson shrugged. Tall cowboy type. Dark hair, maybe mid-20s, did not catch much more than that. He seemed sincere, though. Picked out good supplies, too, said to fill your pantry proper. The older man started unloading crates, carrying them to the porch. Delilah watched in stunned silence as he made trip after trip. Beans, rice, salt pork, coffee, sugar, lard, cornmeal, eggs carefully packed in sawdust, a sack of potatoes, dried apples, and at the very end, a small paper sack of peppermint sticks. When everything was unloaded, Mr. Henderson tipped his hat again. You take care now, Miss Grant. And if you ask me, you have got a good friend looking out for you, whoever he is. The wagon rattled away, leaving Delilah standing on her porch surrounded by more food than she had seen in weeks. Her hands shook as she picked up the bag of peppermint sticks, and then the tears she had been holding back all day finally came, hot and fast and relieving. Someone had seen her. Someone had cared. In this town that had seemed to turn its back on her, someone had noticed her struggle and done something about it. She spent the rest of the afternoon putting away the supplies, marveling at each item. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute she had been choking down. Sugar, precious and white. Salt pork that would flavor beans for weeks. Eggs which she had not tasted in a month. She made herself a proper supper that night, biscuits with lard, beans with a chunk of salt pork, coffee sweetened with real sugar. After she ate, She sat at the table and tried to think who her mysterious benefactor could be. She knew everyone in Rico, at least by sight. A tall cowboy with dark hair, mid-20s. That could describe half a dozen men, but none of them had ever shown particular interest in her. Most of the young men in town were miners or prospectors, rough types who barely noticed her beyond crude comments shouted across the street. The few respectable men her age were already married or spoken for. She thought of her father, how he had always said that kindness existed even in the hardest places, if you knew where to look for it. Maybe he had been right. Bennett spent the next week preparing for Callahan's cattle drive and trying very hard not to think about Delilah Grant. He had done his good deed, salved his conscience, and now it was time to focus on work. He helped Callahan sort out supplies, check tack and gear, and interview the other men who would make up the crew. It was familiar work, comfortable, and he threw himself into it with the focus of long practice. But on Sunday, when he had a rare free afternoon, he found himself walking past the church at precisely the time services let out. He told himself he was just exploring the town, getting to know the layout, but he knew he was lying. She emerged with the other worshippers, wearing the same worn dress he had seen before, but she looked different. The hollow desperation in her face had eased slightly. She was talking with an older woman, nodding politely at whatever was being said, and when she smiled, Bennett felt something shift in his chest. He should have walked away. Instead, he found himself crossing the street, angling his path so that he would pass near the church steps. She did not notice him at first, too focused on her conversation, but when she turned to leave, they nearly collided. "Oh, excuse me," she said, stepping back quickly. Bennett removed his hat. "My fault, madam. I was not watching where I was going." Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Up close, he could see that her eyes were the color of honey, warm and clear. There was a dusting of freckles across her nose, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun. "You are new in town," she said. It was not quite a question. "Fairly new. Been here about a week. Bennett Brooks." He offered his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her hand was small and rough with work, her grip firm. "Delilah Grant. Pleased to meet you, Miss Grant, Mrs. Henderson mentioned you," she said suddenly, and Bennett felt his stomach drop. But then she continued, "She said there has been a cowboy staying at the boarding house. Are you the one working for Mr. Callahan?" "I am. Starting a cattle drive next month." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "My father worked in the mines before he died. I do not know much about cattle, but it sounds like hard work." "It is, but honest. I am sorry about your father." A shadow crossed her face. "Thank you. It was very sudden." An awkward silence fell between them. Bennett scrambled for something to say, anything to keep the conversation going, but an older woman called Delilah's name and she turned away. "I should go," she said. "It was nice meeting you, Mr. Brooks." "Miss Grant," he said, nodding as she walked away. He watched her go, joining a small group of women who were heading down the street. She glanced back once, just briefly, and he thought he saw curiosity in her expression. Over the next 2 weeks, Bennett found excuses to be in town more often than necessary. He would ride in to check on supplies that did not need checking, to ask Callahan questions that could have waited, to buy things at the general store that he did not really need. And sometimes, if he timed it right, he would see her. She was often at the general store, occasionally buying small items now that she had a little money from selling eggs from the chickens that Mr. Henderson had quietly added to the delivery of supplies. Bennett learned from listening to gossip that she had started taking in mending, that she was good with a needle, that several of the mining families had hired her to repair work clothes and linens. They nodded to each other when their paths crossed. exchanged brief pleasantries about the weather or the town. He learned that she had a quick smile and a dry sense of humor that surfaced when she felt comfortable. She learned that he was from a ranching family, that he loved horses, that he had been saving money to start his own spread someday. Neither of them acknowledged the growing awareness between them, the way conversations seemed to last a little longer each time, the way she looked for him in crowds and he engineered chances to be where she might be. It was Mrs. Henderson who finally forced the issue. She cornered Bennett at the store 3 weeks after his arrival in Rico. "You are the one who bought those supplies for Delilah Grant," she said bluntly. It was not a question. Bennett considered denying it, but Mrs. Henderson's knowing look made it pointless. "I asked you to keep that anonymous." "I did, and I will continue to do so, but I am not blind, Mr. Brooks. I see the way you look at her, and the way she looks at you, though I doubt she realizes it herself yet." "I do not know what you mean," Mrs. Henderson snorted. "Young man, I have been married for 32 years. I know what attraction looks like. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing," Bennett said. "I am starting a cattle drive in a few days. I will be gone for a month, maybe more, and after that I will probably move on. I always do." "That is a coward's answer." The words stung because they were true. Bennett had spent 5 years moving from place to place, job to job, convincing himself he was working towards something when really he was running from the commitment of staying still. The idea of settling down, of putting down roots, of letting himself care about people and places terrified him in a way that stampedes and outlaws never had. "She does not even know it was me who sent the food," he said weakly. "Then maybe you should tell her." "Why?" "So she feels obligated to me. So she has to be grateful. That is not what I want." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. "I know it is not, and that is exactly why you should tell her. She has been eating herself up trying to figure out who her mysterious benefactor is. She deserves to know. And you deserve to have her know if you ask me." Bennett bought his supplies and left without answering, but Mrs. Henderson's words stayed with him. That night, lying in his narrow bed at the boarding house, he stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what he wanted. The truth was, he could not stop thinking about Delilah Grant, about the strength it must have taken to pawn her mother's ring just to survive, about the pride that kept her chin up even when she was starving, about the way her whole face transformed when she smiled. He admired her in a way he had admired few people in his life, but admiration was not the same as love, and he barely knew her. It would be foolish to upend his life for a woman he had spoken to maybe half a dozen times. Foolish to imagine that she might feel the same attraction he did. Foolish to hope, and yet he found himself hoping anyway. The next day he rode out to her cabin. It was late afternoon, the sun painting the mountains gold and purple. He tied his horse to the fence post and knocked on the door, his heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. She answered wearing an apron smudged with flour, surprise clear on her face. "Mr. Brooks, is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. I just needed to talk to you about something." "May I come in?" She hesitated, clearly aware of the impropriety of a single woman inviting a single man into her home, but then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Of course." The cabin was small but clean, one room that served as kitchen, living area, and bedroom. A curtain could be drawn to partition off the bed, but it was pulled back now. The smell of baking bread filled the air. "I am interrupting your work," Bennett said. "Just bread. It can wait." "Would you like coffee?" "No, thank you. I will not take much of your time." He twisted his hat in his hands, suddenly nervous. "The thing is, Miss Grant, I need to tell you something, and I am not sure how you are going to take it." Concern flickered across her face. "What is it?" "The supplies that were delivered to you a few weeks back. The food that filled your pantry, that was from me." She stared at him, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something he could not quite identify. "You? But why? We barely knew each other then." "I saw you coming out of the pawn shop," he admitted. "I saw your face. And then I heard about what happened to your father, about the mine owners refusing to pay his wages. It was not right, you going hungry because of their greed. I had money, you needed food. It seemed like a simple equation." "Simple," she repeated, her voice faint. She sank into one of the chairs at the table. "You spent, what, $30 on a complete stranger? That is not simple, Mr. Brooks. That is extraordinary." "I did not do it to be extraordinary. I did it because it needed doing." She looked up at him, and he saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I sold my mother's ring for that flour. It was the last thing I had of her, and I traded it for 20 pounds of flour because I was that desperate. And you, a man I had never even met, filled my entire pantry without asking for anything in return. How am I supposed to respond to that? You do not have to respond at all. I did not tell you because I wanted gratitude or recognition. I told you because I am leaving in 3 days for a cattle drive, and I will be gone for a month or more, and I could not leave without you knowing the truth. Why does it matter if I know, if you are leaving anyway?" It was the question he had been asking himself. Bennett took a breath and decided to risk the truth. "Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, I started caring what you think of me. Because I find myself looking for you in town. Because when I think about moving on after this job is done, the idea bothers me more than it should. And I know this is sudden, and probably improper, and you have every right to tell me to leave and never come back. But I needed you to know that the man who sent those supplies is the same man who is standing here now, hoping he has not made a complete fool of himself." The silence that followed felt endless. Delilah stood slowly, crossing to the window. She looked out at the mountains, her back to him. "I tried for weeks to figure out who had helped me," she said quietly. "I made up stories. Maybe it was one of my father's old friends from Kansas, someone who heard about his death and wanted to help. Maybe it was the mine owners feeling guilty. I never imagined it was someone who had just arrived in town, someone who had no reason to care. I do not need a reason to care about someone going hungry." She turned to face him. "My whole life, men have wanted things from me, maybe not many, and never anything I was willing to give, but there was always an expectation. An assumption that kindness came with conditions. You gave me food that literally saved my life, and you asked for nothing. You did not even want me to know it was you. I have been trying to figure out how to repay my mysterious benefactor, and all along it was the cowboy I kept running into at the general store. I do not want repayment." "I know you do not. That is what makes this so complicated." She laughed, a short, almost helpless sound. "I think I have been half in love with you since the second time we talked, when you told me about growing up on your family's ranch and your eyes lit up like a child's. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just grateful for the food and projecting those feelings onto the nearest eligible man. But it is not gratitude I feel when I see you. It is something entirely different." Bennett's heart felt like it might burst through his ribs. "What is it you feel?" She met his gaze directly. "Hope, possibility, things I have not let myself feel since my father died. You make me think that maybe I can have a future beyond just surviving day to day." He crossed the room to her, stopping just close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair. "I am leaving in 3 days," he said, "but I will come back. I promise you, Delilah, I will come back. People make promises they do not keep all the time. Not me. I have never made a promise I did not intend to keep, and I am not about to start now." She searched his face as if looking for cracks in his sincerity. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she smiled, tentative but real. Then I suppose I will be here when you get back. You could write to me, care of the Callahan Ranch in Silverton, if you wanted. I could do that. They stood there, neither quite willing to take the final step, both aware of how quickly things had shifted between them. Finally, Bennett reached out and took her hand. May I call on you properly when I return, court you the way you deserve to be courted? I would like that very much. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt more intimate than it had any right to be. Then it is settled. I will work Callahan's drive, save my money, and come back to Rico, and then we will see where this leads. I already know where it leads, Delilah said softly. I am just waiting for you to catch up. The 3 days before the cattle drive passed in a strange haze of anticipation and reluctance. Bennett helped finalize preparations, but his mind was always partly on the cabin at the edge of town, on the woman who had somehow become central to his thoughts. He saw Delilah twice more before he left, once at church, and once when he rode out to bring her a fresh peppermint stick and make her laugh. The morning he left, he found a package waiting for him at the boarding house. Inside was a carefully wrapped bundle of hardtack and dried meat for the trail and a letter in neat, careful handwriting. Dear Bennett, it read. I am not good at saying goodbye, so I will keep this brief. Ride safe, come back whole, and know that someone in Rico will be watching for your return. Yours, Delilah. He tucked the letter into his shirt pocket, close to his heart, and rode out with Callahan's crew feeling more grounded than he had in years. The cattle drive was exactly as hard as he expected. They were moving 200 head from the high country around Silverton down through the mountains to the rail yards in Durango, navigating steep terrain, spring snowmelt-swollen rivers, and the constant threat of predators. Bennett worked from before dawn until after dark, riding drag, eating dust, nursing ornery cattle through narrow passes and across treacherous fords. But the work was good, the kind of work that left him too tired to think at night and too busy to worry during the day. Callahan was a fair boss. The other hands were competent, and the weather mostly held. They lost 3 head to a mountain lion, 2 to a fall, and spent a tense afternoon rounding up 20 that spooked and scattered during a thunderstorm, but overall the drive went smoothly. At night, sitting around the campfire, Bennett found himself talking about Rico in a way he had never talked about any town before, about the mountains that ringed it like protective walls, about the people, rough and hardscrabble but decent underneath, about a woman with honey-colored eyes and hands that trembled when she was trying not to cry. The other hands teased him mercilessly, as cowboys did, but there was no real malice in it. Most of them understood the pull of a good woman, the way the thought of someone waiting could make even the hardest work bearable. 3 weeks into the drive, they camped near a trading post, and Bennett bought paper and a pencil to write his first letter. Dear Delilah, he wrote, his handwriting cramped and awkward. We are about halfway to Durango. The work is hard but good. I find myself thinking about Rico often and about the people I left there, especially one person in particular. I hope this letter finds you well. I hope your pantry is still full and your sewing work is going smoothly. I hope you think of me sometimes the way I think of you. I will write again when we reach Durango. Until then, I remain yours faithfully, Bennett. He posted the letter at the trading post and tried not to count the days until he might receive a reply. Back in Rico, Delilah had settled into something approaching normalcy. The food Bennett had provided had given her breathing room to establish herself as a seamstress. Word spread that she was skilled with a needle, and she found herself with more work than she could handle. She mended work clothes for miners, altered dresses for the few respectable women in town, even made curtains and tablecloths on commission. The money was not much, but it was steady, and combined with the eggs from her chickens and the vegetables she was starting to plant in a small garden plot, she was managing. But managing was not the same as thriving, and thriving was not the same as being happy. She found herself thinking about Bennett at odd moments. While stitching a hem, she would remember the way his hands had looked holding his hat. While gathering eggs, she would remember the sound of his laugh. While lying in bed at night, she would remember the feel of his lips against her knuckles, and wonder if she had imagined the electricity that had sparked between them. His letter arrived on a Wednesday, delivered by the mail rider who made the circuit through the mountain towns. Delilah recognized the handwriting from the brief note he had left with the peppermint stick, and her heart kicked into a faster rhythm. She read it 3 times, parsing each sentence for hidden meaning, smiling at the formal awkwardness of his phrasing. He was not a man comfortable with words on paper, that much was clear, but the effort he had made touched her deeply. That evening, she composed her reply by lamplight. Dear Bennett, your letter arrived today and brightened what had been a very ordinary Wednesday. I am glad to hear the drive is going well, and I hope you stay safe. Rico is much as you left it, cold and muddy one day, bright and beautiful the next. My sewing work has picked up considerably. I made enough last week to buy back my mother's ring from the pawn shop. The proprietor seemed surprised to see me, but I think even he understood what it meant to have it returned. I wear it now on a chain around my neck, too precious to risk on my finger while I work. I do think of you, more often than is probably wise for a woman who has only known you a few weeks. But wisdom has never been my strong suit. Write when you can. I will be watching for your letters. Yours, Delilah. She posted it the next day and tried not to calculate how long it would take to reach him, how long before he might write back, how many more weeks until he returned to Rico. The cattle drive reached Durango in early May, the herd trail worn but intact. Bennett spent 2 days helping Callahan sort out the paperwork and payment with the railroad buyers, and then Callahan paid the crew. Bennett's share came to $67, more than he had expected thanks to a bonus for the successful delivery. You did good work, Callahan said, counting out the bills. If you are looking for steady employment, I could use a foreman on my spread. The pay would be $40 a month plus room and board. Interested? It was a generous offer. Foreman work was skilled labor, respected, and $40 a month was more than most cowboys made. A year ago, Bennett would have jumped at the opportunity. But now, with Delilah's letter tucked in his pocket and Rico pulling at him like a compass needle toward north, he found himself hesitating. Can I think on it? He asked. Callahan studied him with those shrewd eyes. This is about that Grant girl, is not it? Partially. Mostly. Yes. You planning to marry her? The question should have scared him. Instead, Bennett found himself answering honestly. I think I might be, if she will have me. Callahan laughed, a rough bark of sound. Well, I will be damned. I did not take you for the marrying type, Brooks. But I have been wrong before. Tell you what, the foreman job will be open for another month or so. You go back to Rico, figure out your situation, and let me know. If it works out with the girl and you still want work, the offer stands. Bennett shook his hand, grateful for the understanding. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that more than you know. Just doing what is right. And Brooks, do not wait too long to ask her. Women like that do not stay single forever. Bennett rode back to Rico with his saddlebags heavy and his mind racing. He had money now, enough to start thinking seriously about a future. Enough to court Delilah properly, to perhaps buy a small piece of land, to begin building something permanent. The idea still frightened him, but it also excited him in a way nothing had in years. He arrived in Rico on a Saturday afternoon, dusty and tired but grinning like a fool. He went straight to the boarding house to clean up, then headed to Delilah's cabin. She was in her garden, kneeling in the dirt, planting what looked like bean seeds. She did not notice him at first, too focused on her work, and he took a moment to just watch her. The sun caught the dark strands of hair that had escaped her bun, and her face was peaceful in a way he had not seen before. "I hear that is going to be a fine crop," he called out. She jerked upright, spinning around, and the smile that spread across her face when she saw him was worth every dusty mile of the journey back. She stood, wiping her hands on her apron, and he closed the distance between them in long strides. "You are back," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. "I told you I would be. I know, but part of me did not quite believe it. Men leave all the time and do not come back. I am not those men." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, marveling that he could touch her so easily, that she leaned into his touch like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I got your letter. About the ring." Her hand went to her throat where a delicate chain disappeared beneath her collar. "I wanted you to know. It felt important that you should know. I am glad you got it back. It belongs with you." They stood there in her garden, the spring sun warm on their shoulders, and Bennett felt the last pieces of his wandering heart settle into place. "I have $67 in my saddlebags," he said. "Callahan offered me a foreman job at $40 a month. I told him I needed to come back here first to see if maybe there was a reason to stay in Rico instead." Delilah's eyes widened. "You turned down a foreman job?" "I did not turn it down. I asked for time to think. But the truth is, I already know what I want. I want to stay here. I want to court you properly. I want to see if what we have is real or just something we both talked ourselves into because we were lonely and the timing seemed right. And if it is real, then I want to marry you. I want to buy some land and build a house. I want to raise horses and maybe cattle and definitely children, if you want them. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep next to you every night. I want to be the man who fills your pantry when it is empty and holds you when you are sad and makes you laugh when you need it. I want everything, Delilah, if you will have me." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling. "You have known me for less than 2 months. I know. It is insane. Tell me no if you think I am crazy. I cannot tell you no because I am just as crazy as you are." "Yes, Bennett. Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, softly at first and then deeper, tasting salt from her tears and sweetness underneath. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with an enthusiasm that made his head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have a ring yet," he said. "I will buy you one, a proper one, but it might take me a few weeks to save up for something worthy of you." She laughed, pulling the chain from beneath her collar. Her mother's ring dangled from it, the small ruby catching the light. "I have a ring. I do not need another one. This one has history. It has meaning. Let it be enough." "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Though perhaps you could help me get it sized so I can wear it on my finger instead of on this chain." "I can do that. I can do anything you need." They went inside, and Delilah made coffee while Bennett told her about the cattle drive, about the mountains and rivers, the storms and scares, the campfire stories and endless stars. She told him about Rico in his absence, about the sewing work that had kept her busy, about the garden she was planting, about Mrs. Henderson who kept asking pointed questions about a certain cowboy who had left town. "She knew it was me who sent the supplies, did not she?" Delilah asked. She guessed. I never confirmed it, but yes, she knew. Half the town probably knows by now. Mrs. Henderson cannot keep a secret to save her life, bless her. "Does that bother you?" Delilah considered. "A month ago it might have." I was so determined to prove I could manage on my own, to not need anyone's help. But I am learning that needing help is not the same as being weak, and letting people care about you is not the same as being pitied. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Bennett said seriously. The fact that you accepted help when you needed it just proves that. They talked until the sun set, and the cabin grew dark. Bennett lit the lamps, and they continued talking, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. They discussed the future in broad strokes. Bennett wanted to look at land near Rico, maybe a piece with access to water where he could run some cattle and horses. Delilah wanted to keep her sewing work, at least until they had children. Both of them wanted a real wedding, small but proper, with the whole town invited. When? Bennett asked. When should we get married? Soon, Delilah said. I do not see the point in waiting. We are both adults, we know our own minds, and I have already wasted too much of my life being cautious and afraid. Let us not waste any more time. Next month, then. That gives me time to find land, to build at least the start of a house. I will not ask you to live in a half-finished cabin. I have been living in a half-finished cabin for 3 years. 1 more month will not kill me. But you will not have to any more. That is the point. She reached across the table and took his hand. Bennett Brooks, are you trying to rescue me? No, I am trying to build a life with you. There is a difference. Good, because I do not need rescuing, I just need a partner. Then that is what I will be. The next morning, Bennett started looking at land. There were several parcels available near Rico, most of them raw mountain terrain that would require significant work to make productive. But he found one piece that called to him, 40 acres with a creek running through it, good grass for grazing and enough timber for building. The owner was asking $200, more than Bennett had, but he thought he could negotiate. He rode out to the Callahan ranch and found the older man repairing a fence line. Back already, Callahan said. That was quick. You decide about the foreman job. I did. I appreciate the offer, sir, but I am going to stay in Rico. I am getting married. Callahan grinned. Fast work. Congratulations. She is a lucky woman. I think I am the lucky one, but I do have a question for you. I found a piece of land near Rico that I want to buy. The owner wants 200 and I only have 67. Would you be willing to loan me the difference? I can pay you back over time with interest. Callahan considered, then shook his head. I will not loan you the money, Brooks, but I will buy a half interest in your operation. You provide the land and the labor, I provide the startup capital and access to my breeding stock. We split the profits 50-50 for the first 5 years, then I sell my share back to you at a fair price. That way you are not starting off in debt and I get a good return on my investment. It was more than generous. It was a lifeline. Bennett stuck out his hand. Deal, and thank you. Just make it successful, and invite me to the wedding. Bennett bought the land that week, paying cash and signing the deed that made him a landowner for the first time in his life. He stood on his property, and looked at the mountains rising around him and the creek singing over its rocky bed, and felt something settle deep in his bones. This was home. This was where he would build his future. He started work on a cabin immediately, enlisting help from some of the miners who were glad for the extra money. The structure went up quickly, a simple 4-room affair with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. It was not fancy, but it was solid, and it was theirs. Delilah came out every few days to check on progress, always bringing food for the workers and suggestions for improvements. She had opinions about everything from the placement of the windows to the size of the kitchen, and Bennett loved every minute of her involvement. This was not his house that he was building for her. This was their house that they were creating together. They set the wedding for the first Saturday in June at the church in Rico. Delilah made her own dress, a simple creation of cream-colored muslin that made her look like something out of a dream. Mrs. Henderson organized the reception, recruiting every woman in town to contribute food. Callahan gave away the bride, standing in for the father Delilah had lost. Bennett stood at the altar in his best clothes, which were still just clean work clothes and a new shirt, and watched Delilah walk down the aisle toward him. She was smiling, that brilliant smile that transformed her whole face, and he felt his throat tighten with emotion. The ceremony was brief, the vows traditional. Bennett slipped the ruby ring onto Delilah's finger, and she slipped a simple gold band onto his that she had bought with her sewing money. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when Bennett kissed her, the small church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the church hall, and it seemed like the entire town turned out. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, endless congratulations and well wishes. Bennett danced with his wife, marveling at the word, and felt happier than he had ever thought possible. As the sun set and the party wound down, they rode out to their new home together. The cabin was finished enough to be livable, with a real bed and furniture Bennett had built himself. Delilah walked through the rooms, running her hands along the walls, and Bennett followed her, suddenly nervous. "It is not much," he said. "Not yet, but I will keep improving it. I will add on as we need more space. I will make it everything you deserve." She turned to him, and in the lamplight her eyes were soft. "It is perfect, because it is ours." That night, they consummated their marriage in the bed Bennett had built, learning each other's bodies with tenderness and growing passion. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Delilah rested her head on Bennett's chest and listened to his heartbeat. "Do you ever think about how strange this is?" she asked. "How if you had not walked past the pawn shop at exactly the right moment, we might never have met?" "I think about it all the time. I think about all the little choices that led us here. If I had not taken Callahan's job, if you had not sold the ring that day, if Mrs. Henderson had not been willing to deliver those supplies anonymously, any one of those things changes and we are not here now. Do you believe in fate? I did not used to, but meeting you has made me reconsider. Maybe some things are meant to be. I like that idea, that somewhere in the universe there was a plan for us to find each other." Bennett kissed the top of her head, found each other and filled each other's pantries. She laughed, swatting his chest. "Is that what we are calling it now, among other things?" They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and when they woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the windows and birds singing in the trees outside, it felt like waking up to the first day of forever. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and simple happiness. Bennett and Delilah settled into the rhythm of married life, learning each other's habits and quirks. He discovered that she sang while she worked, old ballads her mother had taught her, and that she was terrible at cooking meat but could bake bread that tasted like heaven. She learned that he talked to the horses like they were people, and that he had nightmares sometimes about the cattle drive, about things going wrong in ways they had not. Callahan made good on his promise of breeding stock, sending over 2 good mares and a young stallion with excellent bloodlines. Bennett started building his horse herd slowly, carefully, selecting for temperament and intelligence as much as physical characteristics. He took occasional work breaking horses for local ranchers, building a reputation as someone who could gentle even the most difficult animals. Delilah continued her sewing work, but she also threw herself into making their house a home. She planted flowers around the porch, made curtains for every window, and slowly filled the rooms with small touches that reflected both of their personalities. A quilt her mother had made spread across their bed. A pair of worn spurs Bennett's father had given him hung by the door. Books they had both loved arranged on a shelf Bennett built. They had neighbors now, other families homesteading in the valley, and Delilah organized Sunday dinners where everyone gathered to share food and news. Bennett found himself part of a community in a way he never had been during his wandering years, and he was surprised by how much he valued it. In August, Delilah started feeling sick in the mornings. At first she thought it was something she ate, but when the nausea persisted and her monthly courses failed to appear, she began to suspect the truth. She waited until she was certain before telling Bennett, wanting to be sure before getting his hopes up. She chose a night when they were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Bennett had his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into his warmth, gathering her courage. "I have something to tell you," she said. He tensed slightly. "That sounds ominous." "It is not. At least, I hope it is not. I am pregnant, Bennett. We are going to have a baby." The silence stretched just long enough to make her nervous, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every animal within a mile. He stood, pulling her up with him, and spun her in a circle despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he said, setting her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "We are having a baby. When? How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Should you be sitting down? I am fine. I am maybe 2 months along, so the baby should arrive in late winter or early spring. And yes, I probably should be sitting down, but only because you are making me dizzy with all your spinning." He guided her back to her chair as if she were an invalid, and she could not help but laugh at his sudden solicitude. "I am pregnant, not dying. You do not have to treat me like I am made of spun sugar. I know, but I have never done this before. I do not know what I am supposed to do. Love me, support me, help me when I need it, and let me be independent when I do not. The same things you have been doing. I can do that." He knelt beside her chair, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby. Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am terrified and thrilled and happier than I have ever been in my entire life. Is that normal?" "I think so. I feel the same way." They sat together in the gathering darkness, making plans and dreaming dreams, imagining the child who would join them in the spring. A boy or a girl, it did not matter. Healthy was all they hoped for, healthy and loved. The pregnancy progressed normally through the fall. Delilah felt tired and queasy for the first few months, but by October she was blooming, her face glowing and her energy returned. Her belly swelled with the growing child, and Bennett loved watching the changes in her body, the visible proof of the life they had created together. He became fiercely protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or overwork herself. Delilah tolerated his hovering for the most part, though she drew the line when he tried to stop her from riding to town to buy supplies. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she said firmly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing the work that needs doing. I'm not going to spend the next 4 months sitting in a chair while you wait on me hand and foot. I just want to keep you safe, both of you." Her expression softened. "I know you do. And I love you for it. But you have to trust that I know my own limits. If I need help, I will ask. I promise." It was hard for him, learning to step back and let her make her own choices about her body and her capabilities. But he was learning, slowly, that partnership meant trust as much as it meant care. Winter came early that year, snow falling in late October and not letting up for weeks. Bennett made sure they were well stocked with firewood and food, not wanting to risk being caught unprepared. The horses were moved to a shelter he had built, snug and warm against the mountain cold on Christmas Eve. They invited their neighbors and friends for a celebration. The small cabin was packed with people, the air warm from body heat and the fire crackling in the hearth. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was music and dancing and more food than a dozen people could possibly eat. Delilah glowed in the lamplight, her pregnant belly obvious now beneath her dress, and Bennett could not stop looking at her. Near midnight, after most of the guests had left, Mrs. Henderson pulled Delilah aside. "You look happy, dear," the older woman said. "I am. Happier than I ever thought I could be. You deserve it. After everything you went through last year, you deserve all the happiness in the world. And that young man of yours, he is a good one. You hold on to him." "I plan to, for the rest of my life." January brought bitter cold and deep snow. Bennett spent his days tending the horses and keeping the cabin warm, venturing out only when necessary. Delilah nested, washing baby clothes she had sewn and arranging the cradle Bennett had built. She was getting close now, her belly huge, her movements slow and ungainly. On a frigid night in late February, she woke Bennett with a hand on his shoulder. "It is time," she said calmly. He bolted upright, suddenly wide awake. "Time? You mean the baby?" "Yes, I mean the baby. My water broke about an hour ago, and the pains are getting stronger. You need to fetch Mrs. Jameson." The older woman lived a mile away and had delivered half the babies in the county. Bennett dressed faster than he ever had in his life, saddled his horse and rode through the dark and cold to fetch the midwife. By the time they returned, Delilah's pains were coming hard and fast, and she was gripping the bedpost with white knuckles. Mrs. Jameson took charge immediately, sending Bennett to boil water and gather clean cloths, keeping him busy and out of the way. The labor lasted through the night and into the morning, long hours of waiting and worry, while Delilah worked to bring their child into the world. Bennett had faced stampedes and storms, dangerous river crossings and ornery horses, but nothing had ever frightened him like hearing his wife cry out in pain and being unable to do anything to help her. He paced the main room while Mrs. Jameson stayed with Delilah behind the partition, murmuring encouragement and instructions. Finally, as the sun rose over the mountains, Bennett heard a new sound, a thin, reedy wail that grew stronger with each breath. He rushed to the partition and Mrs. Jameson emerged holding a squirming bundle wrapped in blankets. "You have a son," she said, placing the baby in Bennett's arms. "A healthy, angry son who is not at all happy about being born into the cold." Bennett looked down at the red-faced, screaming infant and felt his heart expand to include this new person. His son. His and Delilah's son. "Can I see her?" he asked. "In a moment. Let me finish up and then you can both meet your boy properly." When Bennett was finally allowed behind the partition, he found Delilah propped up on pillows, exhausted but smiling. Her hair was damp with sweat, her face pale, but her eyes were bright when she looked at the baby in Bennett's arms. "Let me see him," she said. Bennett carefully transferred the now quieting infant to her arms, and Delilah unwrapped the blankets to count fingers and toes. "He is perfect," she breathed. "Absolutely perfect, just like his mother. Flatterer. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months without settling on anything definite, but looking at his son's face, Bennett knew immediately what felt right. "What about Thomas? After your father," Delilah's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas Brooks. Yes, I think that is perfect." They spent the rest of the day in bed together, the three of them, getting to know each other. Thomas was a good baby, quieting when he was held, nursing strongly when Delilah offered her breast. Bennett marveled at everything about him, from his tiny fingers to the shock of dark hair on his head. Mrs. Jameson stayed for 2 days, helping Delilah recover and teaching both new parents the basics of infant care. When she left, she squeezed Bennett's shoulder. "You did good, Mr. Brooks. You have got a fine family there. Take care of them." "I will, I promise." The early months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Thomas woke every few hours to nurse, leaving both parents sleep-deprived and fumbling. But there was joy in the exhaustion, wonder in every tiny milestone. His first smile, around 6 weeks old, made Delilah cry happy tears. The first time he rolled over, Bennett insisted on trying to get him to do it again so he could see. As spring arrived and the snow melted, they emerged from the cocoon of new parenthood to find the world greening around them. Bennett got back to work with the horses, though he arranged his schedule so he was never far from the house for long. Delilah slowly resumed her sewing work, fitting it in around Thomas's naps. They hosted their neighbors again for Easter, and everyone cooed over the baby. Thomas was passed from person to person, comfortable with the attention, and Bennett felt a surge of pride watching his son charmed everyone he met. "He is going to be a heartbreaker," Mrs. Henderson predicted. "Look at those eyes, just like his father's." "God help us," Delilah said, but she was smiling. That summer, Callahan came to visit and inspect his investment. He found the horse operation running smoothly, with several promising yearlings and inquiries from buyers about the next foal crop. "You have done well for yourself, Brooks," Callahan said, watching Bennett work with a young mare in the round pen. "Better than I expected, honestly. Most cowboys who try to settle down end up back on the trail within a year, but you have stuck it out." "I have got reasons to stay now," Bennett said, gesturing toward the cabin where Delilah sat on the porch with Thomas. "That you do. She is a good woman, your wife, and the boy is fine and healthy. I am a lucky man. Luck has nothing to do with it. You worked for this. Both of you did. Do not forget that." As the months passed, and Thomas grew from infant to crawler to toddler, taking his first wobbly steps, Bennett and Delilah settled deeper into the life they had built. There were hard days, certainly. Days when money was tight, or the weather was brutal, or Thomas was sick and fretful. But there were far more good days, days filled with laughter and love, and the simple satisfaction of work well done. On their second anniversary, Bennett surprised Delilah with a new ruby ring, this one with a larger stone and more intricate setting. "I know you love your mother's ring," he said as he slipped it onto her finger beside the original. "But I wanted to give you something that came from me. Something that represents our life together." Delilah held up her hand, admiring the way the two rings looked together. "It is beautiful. You did not have to do this. I wanted to. You deserve beautiful things, Delilah. You deserve everything. I already have everything I need, right here." That fall, Delilah told him she was pregnant again. The news was less shocking this time, but no less joyful. Thomas was 2 now, old enough to be excited about becoming a big brother, though Bennett doubted he really understood what that meant. This pregnancy was harder than the first. Delilah was sick for longer, tired more easily, and by the 8th month she was uncomfortable constantly. But she bore it with good humor, joking that this baby was clearly going to be more trouble than Thomas had been. "Maybe a girl this time," she said one evening, rubbing her swollen belly. "A daughter to balance out our son." "Boy or girl, as long as they are healthy," Bennett said, the same thing he had said during her first pregnancy. Their daughter was born on a warm May morning, coming so fast that Mrs. Jameson barely made it in time. Unlike Thomas, who had taken his time, this baby was in a hurry to meet the world. She came out screaming, red-faced and furious, and did not stop for 20 minutes. "This one has opinions," Mrs. Jameson said, laughing. "Good lungs on her, too." They named her Grace, because Delilah said she was a gift they had not dared to hope for. Grace Brooks joined her family with enthusiasm, demanding attention and affection from everyone around her. Thomas was fascinated by his tiny sister, wanting to hold her constantly, and Bennett had to remind him frequently to be gentle. With 2 children, life became even more hectic, but Bennett and Delilah worked as a team, supporting each other through the chaos. When one was overwhelmed, the other stepped in. When both were exhausted, they collapsed together and reminded each other that this phase would not last forever. The horse operation continued to grow. Bennett's reputation as a breeder and trainer spread, and buyers came from as far as Denver to look at his stock. He hired help occasionally, young men looking to learn the trade, and he discovered he enjoyed teaching as much as he enjoyed the work itself. Delilah's sewing business evolved as well. She started designing clothes rather than just altering them, and her dresses became sought after by the wealthier women in Rico and the surrounding towns. She hired 2 young women as apprentices, teaching them her techniques and paying them fairly for their work. They prospered, slowly but steadily. The cabin was expanded, room added for the growing children and for Bennett's aging mother who came to live with them after his father passed. The horse herd grew to nearly 30 head. They bought more land, adjacent parcels that increased their holding to over 100 acres. On their 5th anniversary, they sat on the porch as the sun set, watching Thomas and Grace play in the yard. Thomas was building something elaborate with sticks and stones, while Grace toddled after him, trying to help and mostly getting in the way. "You ever miss it?" Delilah asked. "The wandering, the freedom of the trail." Bennett considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, the way every day had a clear purpose, a simple goal, but I do not miss the loneliness. I do not miss waking up in a different place every week, never belonging anywhere. This is better. This is everything. Even when the children are screaming and the horses are sick and the bills are piling up, even then. Especially then, because those are the moments that prove this is real, that we are building something that will last." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Bennett Brooks. I loved you when you filled my pantry. I loved you when you came back from that cattle drive. I loved you when you built this house and married me and gave me these beautiful children. And I will love you when we are old and gray and our children have children of their own. I love you too, always." As the years passed, their love only deepened. They weathered hard times and celebrated good ones, always together, always partners. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Grace became a whirlwind of energy and opinions, keeping everyone on their toes. They added 2 more children to the family, another son named James and a daughter they called Catherine. Bennett never did go back to trail work or wandering. He found everything he needed right where he was, in the mountains of Colorado, on land he owned, surrounded by the family he had built with the woman who had captured his heart in a single moment of desperate courage. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Delilah would take out the 2 ruby rings she wore on her finger, the small one from her mother and the larger one from Bennett, and she would remember the day she had pawned the first one for flour. She would remember the desperation and fear, the hollow ache of hunger, the terrible choice between survival and sentiment. And then she would look at her husband, at her children, at the life they had created from that moment of crisis, and she would marvel at how one act of anonymous kindness had changed everything. Bennett had seen her at her lowest and chosen to help, expecting nothing in return. That generosity had sparked something between them that grew into love, into family, into forever. The pawnshop ring had bought her a week of survival. Bennett's gifts had bought her a lifetime of joy. On their 10th anniversary, Bennett surprised her with a trip to Durango, their first time away from the ranch without children in years. They stayed in a hotel, ate dinner in a restaurant with white tablecloths, and danced in the ballroom like they were courting again. As they swayed to the music, Delilah said, "Do you remember that first day, when you came to my cabin to tell me you were the one who sent the supplies? Every detail. I was so nervous I thought I might be sick. I could not believe it was you. This handsome stranger who had already done so much for me, standing there saying he wanted to court me. I thought I must be dreaming. If you were dreaming, then I was too. Because none of this feels quite real sometimes. It is too good, too perfect. It is not perfect. We have had our struggles, true, but we have faced them together, and that makes all the difference. The song ended, but they kept swaying, holding each other close, neither wanting to let go. Around them, other couples danced and laughed, but Bennett and Delilah were lost in their own world, remembering the path that had brought them here. When they returned to Rico, the children descended on them with stories of everything that had happened in the 2 days they had been gone. Thomas had helped their hired hand deliver a foal. Grace had baked cookies with Grandma Brooks. James had lost a tooth. Catherine had learned a new song. Life continued, busy and full and messy and beautiful. The children grew and the horses multiplied and the seasons turned their eternal wheel. Winter snow gave way to spring mud, which yielded to summer heat, which cooled into autumn gold, which froze again into winter white. Through it all, Bennett and Delilah held fast to each other. They were partners in every sense, sharing the work and the worry, the joy and the sorrow. They fought sometimes, the way all couples did, but they always made up, always chose each other, always remembered that they were stronger together than apart. As Thomas approached his 18th birthday, Bennett began teaching him the finer points of horse breeding and training, preparing to eventually hand over management of the operation. The boy had a natural gift with animals, patience and understanding that could not be taught, and Bennett was proud to see his son developing into a skilled horseman. Grace, at 16, had discovered a talent for business. She kept the books for both the horse operation and Delilah's sewing business, tracking every penny with meticulous care. She talked about going to Denver someday to study accounting, and while Bennett worried about his daughter in the big city, he supported her ambitions. James and Catherine were still young, 12 and 10, full of mischief and energy. They ran wild on the ranch with the neighbor children, climbing trees and swimming in the creek and riding the gentler horses until they were confident in the saddle. On a warm evening in late summer, when all the children were occupied with their own activities, Bennett and Delilah found themselves alone on the porch again, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. "We did it," Delilah said softly. "Did what?" "Built a life. Raised a family. Created something that will last beyond us." Bennett took her hand, feeling the familiar shape of the 2 rings on her finger. "We did, and I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts. Those are the moments that taught us what we are made of, what we can survive together." She turned to face him, and in the fading light he could see the gray threading through her dark hair, the lines around her eyes that came from years of smiling. She was more beautiful now than she had been at 22, weathered and worn and absolutely radiant. "I have been thinking," she said, "about that day I pawned my ring, about how desperate I was, how frightened. I thought I had lost everything that mattered. But you had not. No, I had not. I had lost my father and my security, but I still had myself. I still had the strength to keep going, to do what needed to be done. And then you came along and reminded me that I did not have to do it alone. You would have been fine without me. You are the strongest person I know, maybe. But I am glad I did not have to find out. I am glad you walked past that pawn shop at exactly the right moment. I am glad you cared enough to help a stranger. I am glad you came back. I am glad for all of it, every single moment that led us here." Bennett pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her the way he had done 1,000 times before. "So am I, so am I." As the stars emerged overhead and the night sounds of the ranch rose around them, they stayed there together. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary from a single act of kindness. The pantry that Bennett had filled all those years ago had long since been restocked countless times, the food eaten and replaced in the eternal cycle of daily life. But the metaphor remained. They continued to fill each other's pantries, not just with food but with love and support and unwavering partnership. When one was empty, the other gave. When both were full, they shared with those around them. Their children grew and eventually left to build lives of their own. Thomas took over the horse operation, expanding it further and building a name that was known throughout Colorado. Grace did go to Denver, where she started a successful business helping ranchers and farmers manage their finances. James became a veterinarian, the first in the family to go to university. Catherine followed her mother's footsteps into design, creating clothes that were sold in shops from Santa Fe to San Francisco. But they all came home regularly, drawn back to the ranch where they had grown up, to the mountains that had shaped them, to the parents who had shown them what love looked like in its purest form. Bennett and Delilah grew old together on the land they had claimed and tamed and loved. They moved a little slower as the years accumulated. Their hair turned completely gray. Their hands grew gnarled from decades of work. But they still walked out to watch the sunset most evenings, still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other with the same mix of fondness and desire that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. On their 40th anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together what seemed like half of Rico. Friends and neighbors, children and grandchildren, even a few great-grandchildren filled the expanded ranch house and spilled out onto the lawn. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Late in the evening, when the party was winding down, Delilah found Bennett in his favorite chair on the porch. She settled into the chair beside him, groaning a little as her old bones protested. "Quite a celebration," she said. "They did us proud, all of them. They did. We did well, Bennett, with our children, with our life, with everything." He reached over and took her hand, his thumb automatically finding the 2 rings she still wore after all these years. "You still think about that day sometimes?" "The flower and the pawn shop and all of it. I do. How could I not? It was the beginning of everything. I think about it too, about how close I came to just walking past, to minding my own business, to never knowing you existed. The thought terrifies me. But you did not walk past. You stopped. You cared. You changed my entire life with one act of generosity. You changed mine too. You gave me a reason to stop wandering, a reason to put down roots, a reason to become the man I always wanted to be but did not know how." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their family inside the house. Laughter and conversation, the clink of dishes being washed, children being tucked into beds in rooms that had once belonged to their parents. "Delilah Brooks," Bennett said, using her full married name the way he did when he wanted her complete attention. "Bennett Brooks," she replied, matching his formal tone with a smile. "If I had it all to do over again, I would make exactly the same choices. I would see you coming out of that pawn shop, and I would buy those supplies. I would come back from that cattle drive, and I would tell you the truth. I would court you and marry you and build this life with you, exactly the way we did. So would I. Every hard moment, every challenge, every tear, and every laugh. I would choose all of it as long as I got to choose you. Then we are agreed. This life, this love, this family, it was all worth it. More than worth it. It was everything." As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, they remained there together, hands clasped, hearts joined, Two souls who had found each other in the wilderness of the Old West and created something that would echo through generations. The cabin that had once held nothing but a desperate woman and a sack of flour now stood at the heart of a thriving ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward the legacy of love and partnership that Bennett and Delilah had established so many years before. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings, Delilah took out a small wooden box and looked at the receipt from the pawn shop, carefully preserved all these years, Bennett understood. It was a reminder of where they had started, of how far they had come, of the moment when everything changed. She had pawned her ring for a sack of flour, choosing survival over sentiment in her darkest hour. He had filled her pantry instead, offering help without expectation of return. And from those two acts, one born of desperation and one of compassion, had grown a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. They were old now, their active days behind them, their legacy secured in the land they had worked and the children they had raised. But the love between them remained as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having been tested and proven over 4 decades of marriage. On a crisp autumn morning, Bennett woke to find Delilah already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of amber and gold. He joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, and they stood together as they had stood 1,000 times before. "Beautiful," she murmured. "Yes," he agreed, but he was not looking at the mountains. He was looking at her reflection in the window, at the woman who had been his partner and his love for more than 40 years. She caught his gaze in the glass and smiled, that same brilliant smile that had captured his heart the first time he saw it. And in that smile, Bennett saw their entire history. The struggles and triumphs, the losses and gains, the moments of pure joy and crushing sorrow. All of it had led to this moment, to this perfect ordinary morning, to this simple act of standing together watching the sun rise on another day. This was the happily ever after they had built together. Not a fairy tale ending where everything was perfect and easy, but a real ending where love persisted through difficulty, where commitment meant showing up day after day, where partnership meant carrying each other through the hard times and celebrating together in the good. The pantry was full, literally and metaphorically, full of food and love, of memories and hope, of legacy and continuation. Bennett and Delilah had filled it together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And as they stood together in the golden morning light, watching the world wake up around them, they knew with absolute certainty that they had succeeded in the most important task of all. They had built a life worth living together. The story that had begun with a desperate woman pawning her last precious possession for survival had become a saga of love, family, and enduring partnership. The cowboy who had filled her pantry instead of judging her desperation had become her husband, her partner, her forever. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the struggles or the challenges, not the money or the success, but the simple fact that they had found each other and chosen each other and loved each other through everything that life had thrown their way. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their legacy assured. And if their great-grandchildren sometimes asked about the old days, about how great-grandpa and great-grandma had met, the family would tell them the story of the ring and the flour, the pantry and the cowboy who filled it, the love that grew from a single act of kindness. It was a good story. More than that, it was a true story, proved in the life they had lived and the love they had shared. And as Bennett and Delilah held each other in the morning light, they knew that their story would continue in the lives of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. echoing forward through time, a testament to the power of compassion and the endurance of love. This was their happily ever after, earned through hard work and dedication, built on a foundation of mutual respect and unwavering commitment. It was not perfect, but it was theirs, and that made it more precious than any fairy tale could ever be. The pantry was full. The hearts were full. The life was complete. And Bennett and Delilah Brooks, who had started with nothing but determination and a single act of kindness, had everything that truly mattered, together. Always together. Until the end of their days and beyond, in the legacy they left behind and the love they had shared. Their story was finished, their ending written, their happiness secured. And it was, in every way that counted, a perfect conclusion to a love story that had started in the Wild West all those years ago, when a cowboy saw a woman in need and chose compassion over indifference, changing both their lives forever.